John was a Baptist, and he moved into a new neighborhood. And in his new neighborhood, most of the people who lived there were Catholic. And so they all got along really, really well, except during Lent. Because on the first Friday of Lent, John went out and started grilling this wonderful smelling steak, big, thick, and juicy. And kind of the smell of it went into everyone's backyards, while all the Catholics were there on the Fridays of Lent eating cold tuna fish out of a can. And so they weren't really too thrilled, and they said, wow, this is like really temptation here, because they just smelled that delicious steak. So they got together and they were friends with John. They said, well, why don't we evangelize? It's a good idea. Evangelize your neighbors. So they went over, started talking about religion to John, and they said, maybe you'd like to consider becoming Catholic. So John went to church with them. John ended up liking the Catholic Church. John joined the RCIA and went through the whole initiation process. He learned a lot. And then John decided that he would become Catholic. And so there was a beautiful celebration at a Mass where he was confirmed and he received his first communion. And in that particular parish, at the end of the Mass, the priest would bring the new Catholics, those who came into full communion, up into the sanctuary. And he would address each one individually. So when John came up, he touched John on the shoulder and he said, John, you were born a Baptist, you were raised a Baptist, but now you are a Catholic. And everybody got all excited. So the neighborhood thought, well, we're going to have peace this next Lent, because there's not going to be that smell of the steak kind of coming through all of the backyards on every Friday of Lent while they were eating cold tuna fish out of a can. So the first Friday of Lent came up, and lo and behold, all the Catholics smelled the steak, and they were very concerned. And they started texting one another and calling each other, and they said, well, I think we need to do something about this. Let's go check this out, because this is probably coming from John. So they agreed to go over and meet there in his backyard. And sure enough, they saw the smoke coming up, and the smell was very pungent. It was just making them salivate for that steak. But they stopped for a moment because they heard John talking to his grill. Yes, he was talking to his grill. So they looked over the fence, and they saw him talking and touching each one of the steaks and saying to them, you were born a cow, you were raised a cow, but now you are a tuna fish. Well, conversion is a whole lot different than just saying you are a tuna fish all of a sudden. That doesn't work. John may have been converted and was transformed, but needless to say, they had to instruct him a little bit more so that there would be peace in the neighborhood. See, temptation is something, especially on the Fridays of Lent. Maybe this past Friday you suddenly thought, wouldn't it be great to go out and get a hamburger over at BurgerFi? But you realize, wow, this is some sacrifice. And you have to think about it and say, well, I'm doing this for the Lord, because there is some sense of sacrifice. Now, if you went to the Lobster Fest up at Red Lobster and said, aren't I good? I'm eating fish on Friday. Well, that's not really what it's all about. We're kind of called upon to face whatever temptations we have, to make sacrifice from it. And that's really what we hear about in our scriptures today. We hear from the first reading in the book of Genesis about Adam and Eve, about how they were in the garden. Folks, they had everything in the garden. They wanted for nothing. And God really put no boundaries on them except for one. Don't eat of this particular tree. And so when the snake came, the serpent, and said, oh, you need to eat of this tree. Well, why would God tell you that? This is the best tree in the whole garden. It was the devil dressed in snakeskin. And so they said, well, yeah, this looks pretty good. And thus the fall. They couldn't say no to their temptations. They weren't strong enough. Jesus, on the other hand, gives us an incredible example. Jesus gives us an example of being strong in the midst of temptations. And you might say, well, that was really easy for him because he was God. Of course it was easy for him. But we have to remember, Jesus was fully human, but Jesus was also fully divine. So yes, he was divine. Yes, he was God, but he was also human. So he was tempted. So there were things that Jesus would have had to think about and filter and say, well, what should I do? What is the right thing to do here? And so here again, the devil comes to him, this time not in snakeskin, but he's kind of more dressed as like a psychologist and as a scripture scholar. Because the devil says to him, well, if you were the Son of Man, he's questioning his identity. Like, who are you? This is who you say you are, but is it really who you are? And he also started quoting scripture to him, but come on, who knew scripture better than Jesus himself? So we have 3 temptations. In the first one, the devil's telling Jesus, I'm going to tempt you to be more relevant to people. Because if you turn the stone into bread, that's something they can grasp onto. They can understand that. They can't understand all this other stuff you do, but they'll understand food, because everyone has a need for food. But Jesus says, no, they're going to be nourished by my word, by my presence, by what I say, by what I do, by my actions, by my witness that I give. So then the devil says, well, now I want you to be spectacular. I want you to jump off the temple, and you can jump from the top, and you're going to save yourself. You're going to die for them, but you're really not going to die because you're going to live. And Jesus is like, look, I've got other ways to show the people I'm going to give my life for them. I don't have to prove it to them. I will give my life to them because I am God, not because I have to prove to them that I am God. So again, Jesus is strong. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. And then the third one as well. The devil says, well, now I'm going to tempt you to be powerful. I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. And Jesus is like, stop. Get behind me, Satan. Get away. He's strong once again. And so he denies that presence of the devil. And he's like, I'm done. And who came and ministered to him? The moment that the devil left, the angels came. And so the grace of God was there upon him. So we see really a great model here of being strong in the face of temptation. It's a good Sunday to ask ourselves, what are we most tempted by? Maybe think about what you've given up for Lent. It's about 5 days into it now. Where are you at with that? Have you been tempted to this point? I'll be honest with you, I've been a little bit tempted. Every Wednesday night, I go to Brewster's. I like going to Brewster's every Wednesday night. I'm off on Thursday, so it's kind of like a Friday night to me. So I go on Wednesday night, and I get my blast with M&Ms and Crunch in it. And they know me there. Even Father Bowman goes to Brewster's and says, I want the Father Stephen special, and they know exactly what it is. So he goes, and we go there. I like to go there. It's kind of my thing. It's like a reward. Like, oh, it's like, wow, I'm off tomorrow. This is great. So I said, for Lent, I'm not going to go to Brewster's, at least on Wednesday nights. I'm not going to go to Brewster's. But on Friday night, I said, well, I'm not going to go to Brewster's, but maybe I'll ask Father Bowman to go to Sweet Frogs. Well, that wouldn't really quite be the same thing, would it? Because it's a different place. We did go. So I fell a little bit, but I didn't totally go to Brewster's. But here I am, like, rationalizing it. So tempting, it's temptation. And I kind of like fell into it. And I realized, well, I need to be better. Is it like, what am I looking to do? Is it all about going to Brewster's or Sweet Frogs? Or is it saying sacrifice? You can do without that ice cream. You do without like that reward. So another thing maybe that perhaps you're tempted to do. I know whenever I'm stopped at a light, the temptation is to pull out the phone and to say, I'm going to start texting. Oh, someone texted me, so I want to get back to them. Well, most of the time, guess what? It's not immediate. It does not really matter. They don't need an immediate response. So if I'm at the light here at 4:34, I can wait 10 more minutes till I get to the rectory to respond to them. So I'm trying to say, well, put the text thing behind. Put the mobile phone away. Don't be distracted by it. Because I see people driving on I-4 and texting. And I think that's a temptation. If it's their calling out to you, guess what? It can wait. It can wait. Maybe when you're driving, and I say driving because I think that's something that is really critical. A lot of accidents happen. A lot of lives are taken because of foolishness on the roads. What's another temptation when you're driving is to go fast. Yeah, everybody likes to go fast, especially if you're late for something and you're rushing. So you say, well, guess what? I'm going up Markham Woods Road, and you're kind of going there by E.E. Williamson. Well, guess what, folks? It's 45 miles an hour till you get about 2 blocks from E.E. Williamson, and then it's 35 miles an hour. But maybe you're tempted to say, forget it. There's nobody there. I'm going to zip on through. Guess what? You might get caught sometime. I'm not talking from experience here, but I know somebody that did. And they said, I'm going to go. I'm going to be tempted. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to speed. And they got caught there. So, again, they fell into the temptation. Some people have a temptation with shopping. Like, I don't quite get that. I kind of loathe anymore going to the store unless I really have something that I need to get. I like going to Publix. I don't know why. I like going over there a couple times a week, and I'll just buy like 1 or 2 things for what I might need for the next day. But the other day, I drove into Home Goods. And I went into Home Goods up here on 436, and the place was packed. It was Thursday morning. I couldn't believe it. I said, are they giving stuff away here or something? Because, boy, this place is like really busy. So I go in and I'm walking around. I'm like, there's really nothing here that I want. But I found one thing, these like plastic placemats. I said, that's good. It's very practical. You don't have to wash the placemats. You can just wipe them off when they get dirty. Very, very practical. So I get my plastic placemats. I'm waiting online, which was like 20 minutes because there were a lot of people there. And the lady called me up. She says, step up to number 1. So I go stepping up to number 1. And I put it down. And the cashier said to me, is that all you're getting? Well, I don't know, but you should be lucky that I'm buying something, maybe, because really I don't have to be buying anything here. But shopping can be a real problem for some people. Temptation, you need that. You need to buy this, you need to buy that. Do you really need it? Another temptation that I think is kind of common today is with the computer. And it's what happens when people maybe spend way too much time on the computer. Because it's just so convenient. It's just so accessible. And so, you just go to it. Well, I'll Google this, I'll Google that, I'll find out information about what's going on in someplace else, or what was the news, or what's someone else doing. Check your social media, maybe going to websites that are not pure and holy. I always say, if you're going to a place that you would be embarrassed for your grandmother to go to, then you don't need to be going there. That's kind of a good litmus test there, kind of like a good kind of way to say, you know what, you never know who's watching. So you just got to have a good moral code. Well, sometimes people get into those places and they get lost in them. It's just very, very sad. So, we have to be strong and say, I'm not even going to go there. I have a moral code. If you're going on the computer, I'm going to spend 10 minutes. I'm going to do it before 8 o'clock at night. And, set some boundaries. Good boundaries, good relationships. And so as a result, you kind of develop some strength. Well, that's what we need to do with our temptations. Develop a strong shield to say, you know what, when the devil comes knocking on my door, I'm going to say, get away from me, Satan. There was a group of hikers. They were going up a mountain one day, and they saw this older man, and they ran into him, and they were like, hey, how are you doing? They started chatting, and they said, wow, well, we're hiking. What are you doing? He goes, well, I live down the mountain, and I have some repairs to make to my cabin, so I'm looking for some wood. So they go a little bit further, and they meet up with the hiker again, and they said, well, I don't understand. Why are you going all the way up to the top of the mountain to get the wood? Why don't you just, plenty of trees here, why don't you just get the wood here and then bring it down to fix your cabin? And the man said, well, because the wood at the top of the mountain comes from trees that are the strongest. Because the trees at the top of the mountain are the ones that have to endure the worst wind and the worst storms. So they'll be enduring more than any of the ones on the bottom. So I want the strongest wood. So I go up to the top of the mountain, not the bottom. Jesus wants us to take the higher road. Jesus wants us to go up to the top of the mountain. Don't take the low road. It's too easy. And it's not going to help us. But in our lives, our moral lives, when it comes to temptations, when it comes to the things, and you know what your biggest issues are, Lent is a good time to clean out that place, to go there and say, I'm going to make it holy. I'm going to make it sacred. I'm going to be able to say, Lord, I'm okay for you to be there, and I want you to be there in my heart. But in order to do that, we have to be strong, especially in the midst of temptations, in order to realize that we do not listen to the devil, that little voice that comes we need to filter it. And we need to be able to say, get behind me, Satan. I follow one person, and that is God.